Hello, and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we have another amazing guest to reintroduce to you now. Dr. David G. Harper is a returning guest on our show. Be sure to check out his first appearance on episode 319 of Boundless Body Radio. Dr. David G. Harper is a health educator and cancer researcher and has studied the impact of diet on human health for many years. The culmination of that extensive work is the BioDiet, a ketogenic food regimen that he created in 2012. The significant weight loss and health improvements he experienced led Dr. Harper to counsel thousands of people on the BioDiet in clinical trials and on a personal basis with consistent and impressive results. He is the author of the best-selling book BioDiet, the scientifically proven ketogenic way to lose weight and improve health, which has become an international bestseller, reaching as high as number 18 globally for books overall on Amazon.com. Wow. Dr. Harper is an associate professor of kinesiology at the University of Fraser Valley and a visiting scientist at the British Columbia Cancer Research Center, Terry Fox Laboratory. He holds a Ph.D. from the University of British Columbia and completed a post-doctoral fellowship in comparative physiology at the University of Cambridge. He is on the scientific advisory board of the Canadian Clinicians for Therapeutic Nutrition and a member of the Institute for Personalized Therapeutic Nutrition. I consider Dr. Harper a great friend and a great human being, and it is an absolute honor to host him again here. Dr. David G. Harper, welcome back to Balanced Body Radio.
Great to be here, Casey. It's nice chatting with you again. We were just before we started talking about how long it's been. Man, just that COVID did something weird. Those few
I
years
know.
just disappeared into nowhere.
Days were like months, months were like days. It was just so
Yeah.
bizarre.
And actually, the last time we met in person was the Friday, the 13th of 2020 when
That's
COVID
right.
started.
That's
And I
right.
was doing the keynote that morning. Yeah.
Yep.
And you came up and introduced yourself. That was great. Yeah. So we have been friends for a long time. And listen, 319, and what are you up to now in terms of episodes?
Oh, 900 and something. Yeah, we've maintained our cadence of releasing episodes every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. So do
Wow.
that for a few years and you can accumulate quite a few special conversations.
Yeah, and that's a lot of work. So I just wanted to thank you too for the service you do for the general public to get, proper health information out there. As we know, a lot of people turn to the internet to get their health information, and it's kind of full of gunk, and
It
and
kind of
and,
is.
and people trying to sell you stuff, and so it's hard for the lay person out there that doesn't have the academic training, the academic background, the scientific background to know what's what. So the fact that you provide a show where frontline researchers like myself can come in and talk about health, exercise, nutrition, mental health, sleep, all that stuff. And yeah, as you mentioned, that's very flattering bio there. Thank you for that. I'm a health educator, so my research is in ketogenic diets and chronic disease, but I'm happy to talk about any health subject. I know there's a few items that have come up recently, but I'll let you lead the conversation, and I'll try and do my best to answer the questions so that people can understand it. I'm not going to go too deep into the science, but I can if you want me to.
Well, that's the best thing I remember telling you last time. And, when by the time we met in 2020, I was already familiar with your work and I was already giving your book away, recommending your book because it's so understandable for most people. And there's a time and place for all kinds of different research. And you certainly do tons of research in this space as well. But as an educator, you are so good at educating, doing exactly just that and making it accessible for people. So I really do appreciate the kind words. I'm really excited to talk about ketosis today. Obviously, like you said, you're expert of your area of expertise. I do have to say a lot of our messaging is about different sports. You do Formula One races in person, which is amazing. We've talked about soccer in the past. I just have to give you a quick story. I just want to tell you this. This last year, Salt Lake City, Utah acquired an NHL hockey team. So we've now
Yep,
had NHL hockey here. I've worshipped hockey since I was 2 years old.
great.
We had a Flames affiliate for a long time, so I got to see like Theo Fleury and all these people. And I made it to like 6 or 7 games in my entire life professionally. And now, like this year alone, I made it to like 10 or 11. And the other night, I'm in the arena. We're playing. Who are we playing that night? We're playing the Flyers that night. And there's a group of people in the lower bowl, and they're standing up the entire time. They're singing and chanting the entire time and like super high energy. And I'm trying to figure out what are these guys doing? This is not, hockey culture whatsoever. This is definitely more like South American or, soccer culture to just sit there and chant repetitively the entire time. I was totally up for it. I thought the energy was amazing. So 10 years ago ish, some guy in Argentina bought a video game NBA 2K, I believe, and he started playing as the Utah Jazz. And he created a social media movement for people down in South America
Okay.
that were
Yeah.
fans of the Jazz. Our owner, who owns both the hockey team, the Utah Mammoth, and the Utah Jazz, flew down to Uruguay last year, met this guy, told him to like get a group of people, get your papers together. He flew this entire group up for now what is like 10 days of attending NBA basketball games, the G League games, and then this hockey game. And these guys have been like chanting and singing through all of it. It's been really, really cool. I know you're familiar with soccer culture, and
Yeah.
mixing that with hockey was pretty amazing.
Wow, what a great story, and what a testament to the way we've kind of globalized sports, you know. I'm also a big, I'm from Canada, by the way. I'm sitting here in Vancouver, which is not cold right now. We're kind of like fairly warm and wet as we tend to be, but yeah, I'm a big NFL fan too. My team is the Tennessee Titans, which didn't have the best season ever, but I'll be looking forward to the Super Bowl. And even there, you know, they're playing NFL games in Mexico and in Europe, you know, in England and in Germany and so on. So the whole thing is globalizing, and of course, your country and our country and Mexico are all hosting the World Cup soon, which will
It's going to
be
be amazing.
amazing. They're going to be, I think, 3 or 4 games in Vancouver in the first few rounds, which will be great. And of course, this is the home of Vancouver Whitecaps. So if there's any of your local fans, Real Salt Lake, we did very well, and I think really outplayed everybody but one guy on Miami, and that one guy happened to be Lionel Messi. So
Heard of him. I've heard of him. Yeah.
he made the difference. But we're very excited, you know, about having Thomas Mueller on our team as well as the other team, and so. Yeah, we've talked a little bit. We've had our sidebar conversation about that, about hockey. You know, we got the Canucks here. They don't not doing very well this year.
We won't bring that up.
But I grew up in Montreal, so I'm a Montreal Canadiens fan. They're sort of the historic team in the NHL. Yeah, and it is, you know, I've been to games in Nashville because I have family down in Tennessee, which is why I'm a fan there. And I've been to see the Predators play. You know, and they have like it's a different experience than you get in Canada because Canada it's very you know it's organic traditional Canadian hockey fans. They know hockey, but it's not an entertainment thing. So I think what happened was a lot of that entertainment from basketball, you know, where they're playing music and stuff in the breaks has melded into hockey, and you're getting more of that. And then course, having anytime you have South Americans in the room, there's going to be a party, right? So, so bringing that level up too. Anyway, it'll be fun to see. I don't know. Are there any of the FIFA games in Salt Lake City?
No, too
No.
small of a market, I think. Yeah, that's cool that you're going to have some. I'm sure the ticket prices are absolutely insane, but still
Yeah,
cool.
they were kind of. I mean, you know, yeah, but the problem is you don't know who you're going to see when you buy the tickets.
Good point.
And you don't know where you're going to sit. You just kind of have to go into a lottery and you got to put your money up front. And of course, they could be resold, but I'm not into making money from sports. I would love to see that kind of an event where, you know, a working class family could take, you know, a couple of kids and go and see it. But that just is not reality anymore.
No,
But
it's
that's
really
the
not.
global state. Probably, I don't know what Super Bowl tickets are this year, but go Seahawks. I mean, that's the
There you
West
go.
Coast team, so
Yeah,
I'll be.
that's awesome.
Although, you know, Vrabel used to be the coach, of course, of the
That's
Titans,
right.
so
That's
he's.
right.
I'm a fan of his, but I'll be rooting for the local team, which is the Seahawks. There's a lot of Seahawks fans here in
I'm
Vancouver,
sure. I'm
and they're
sure.
awesome. They're
Wow.
they're they're awesome. Their defense is good.
Well, they were not on my bingo card to make the Super Bowl. I'm certainly not a football expert, but I didn't see that one coming. So that's
Yeah, you
awesome.
guys don't
Best of
pay
luck
enough
to them.
attention to us up here.
That's true.
Until
That's
suddenly we're in the finals, like the Whitecaps or the Seahawks or whatever.
sure.
Suddenly in the finals, where did they come from? They go, well, they've been good all year. Nobody pays any attention to them because they're
I,
not
I
in New York, Chicago, or Los Angeles or
Yeah,
Toronto.
no, I've seen tons of Blue Jays stuff all over the place. And like in Mexico, we just took a trip to Mexico, and there was
Yeah.
tons of Blue Jay memorabilia everywhere. So
And
um,
wasn't that a fun series?
that
We,
was
if
crazy.
you go to a Seattle Mariners game, and they had a great series against the Mariners, but if you go to Seattle Mariners games, you'll see as many Blue Jays hats there because they all come down from Vancouver, so it's pretty
Wow.
close. And yeah, that was a fun World Series, and you know, on the sports and events, you know, the last at bat by Kirk, you know, they had the bases loaded. They could have won the game, or as they did, hit into a double play and lose. But he didn't strike out. He swung the bat, right? And he
Yeah.
made contact, and then it's whatever the gods will allow.
Yeah.
And it didn't work out for the Blue, but it could have. You know, they're one base hit away from winning, and everybody, you know, sort of disappointed. But I go, why would you be? They did way better than anybody thought they would do. they brought the whole country together. They really entertained a lot of people. No one expected them to do anything with the Dodgers, and they creamed them a couple games. And they got a whole bunch of new pitchers this year, so they're going to be
Yeah,
tough.
that's right. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I always appreciate a good sports chat, and you are very knowledgeable about it. So I always enjoy chatting with you about that. I wanted to open the conversation by asking you if somebody were to come up and say, what is the difference between the keto diet and ketosis? How would you
Right.
answer that question?
Well, that's a good question. And, there's a question I think a lot of physicians get confused on because physicians, I can refer to Peter Attia, who was on 60 Minutes recently talking about at Stanford how much exercise science he learned in medical school, and it was zero. And how much nutrition did he get in Stanford Medical School, and it was zero. But what they do learn is a condition which is usually associated with diabetes called ketosis, which is or ketoacidosis, which is really high levels of ketones in the blood, and it does create an acidic condition which can be life-threatening. And this is something that diabetics all need to be aware of. But they confuse that term, which I just did. They confuse the term ketoacidosis with ketosis. And ketosis is simply the production of ketones, which happens on a regular basis every night when you go to bed and you're not eating. You'll start producing ketones. Um, but there's what we call nutritional ketosis. I think Stephen Phinney coined that term, which is I would argue, a natural state of a higher level of ketones due to a lack of carbohydrate in the diet. And that's what you get through a ketogenic diet, production of ketones that produces, a tenth to a fifth as much as you get in ketoacidosis. So it's by no means abnormal. It's by no means dangerous. And in fact, there's been books written about it, but the ketones themselves, the ketone that's produced from the fat metabolism is something called acetoacetate. And then that gets converted into a little bit into acetone, which you basically breathe out. You wouldn't notice it. Although if you're diabetic and you're in ketoacidosis, you might actually have so much acetone that you'd smell it on somebody's breath. But you don't get that in nutritional ketosis. And then the rest of it gets converted into something called beta hydroxybutyrate, which is the main, it's a ketone body actually that's produced that has all the amazing effects both intracellularly and on a systemic level, positive effects in the brain, cardiovascular system, metabolism at the very cellular molecular level. So one is a natural state that is beneficial, producing beta hydroxybutyrate. That's a very beneficial compound to have floating around your bloodstream naturally. And although you can supplement with it, and the other is a clinical state of very high ketones in the blood, creating this acidic state, which is life-threatening, which is usually associated with uncontrolled diabetes.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, I really wanted to bring that up because a lot of people will associate the word keto with, what they know from the magazine, magazine rack at the grocery store. It says keto, it's a diet, it's butter and bacon, and that's all fine and good. But I think we underappreciate what the natural normal state, like you said, of ketosis really is and all the wonderful, amazing things it can do for us. I mean, in your own training, you mentioned Peter Attia, but in your own training in, all the universities you went to and on learning and all that stuff, was it ever taught to you?
Well, yeah, I came through physiology. So I learned about ketoacidosis, but not ketosis. But we certainly learned more about what happens at metabolism at the cellular molecular level, because I didn't go through like medical school. I went through, life science and biology and biochemistry and that. So yeah, I was familiar with it, but not so much in terms of nutritional ketosis, because I believed for decades, and I taught for decades, a model of healthy nutrition, which was completely unjustified, in fact, wrong, and now we've learned kind of dangerous, which was, you should have a high carbohydrate, low fat diet, and that was the healthiest thing. And I just, that's what we learned. So you just kind of believe that. And it wasn't until much later in my career when I started investigating nutritional science, now going back almost 20 years, and I started looking for the evidence for that. Is there any evidence for it? And there really wasn't. There was really just a hypothesis by a guy named Ansel Keys that because we're seeing these increased rates of cardiovascular disease and they could see plaques and so on, those plaques involve cholesterol, that cholesterol was a big problem, and it was cholesterol in our diet that was creating the problem. And so that's where that whole, like from the 60s, that whole idea of getting fat and cholesterol out of your diet came from. But sadly, it was really well adopted by medical establishments and by health authorities, but also by the general public as the truth. And still, I mean, go and talk to anybody, and you say, "Oh, I'm going to have steak and eggs or whatever," and they'd be worried about your saturated fat and your cholesterol, and those two things are actually pretty normal. And the cholesterol in your diet, unless you have certain genetic predispositions, isn't really going to affect the cholesterol in your blood because the cholesterol in your blood is produced by your liver. And saturated fat, I don't know, seems like the cleanest burning fuel you can put in your body. It's just carbon and hydrogen. And there is we could talk about the length of the chains of those saturated fatty acids, but saturated fats are completely benign, unless you have a high carbohydrate diet, in which case you probably have some triglyceride issues in your blood and you probably shouldn't be eating saturated fat. But it's not the fat that's the problem, it's the carbohydrate, especially that high glycemic index carbohydrate you get, especially from ultra processed foods. So
Yeah. Wow. Okay. I find it interesting that, you were schooled, got your PhD, learned about biology, but this whole like way of living, a whole system of using energy inside the
mhm.
body, and again, all the positive effects, like they just like breeze past it and don't really teach you much about it until, you have to learn about this 20 years later and discover that the whole linchpin of what we're told about nutrition is not true, has never been proven. It was a hypothesis. It still is to this day. And it sure didn't really help us with what we thought it was going to help with, which was heart disease. That's still the number one killer today.
Yeah, it is. And I'll just tell you a little story about someone I was just talking to, a friend of mine, won't mention names, but her brother was just undergoing what we call cabbage surgery, so coronary artery bypass graft, cabbage. So bypass surgery, people call it commonly. And I was just asking her how it was going, and he's in his early 50s, so that's pretty darn young, especially when I'm north of 60. So, and having that kind of bypass surgery usually indicates long-term lifestyle choices that were not great. And anyway, I was saying, yeah, it's pretty as routine as opening your chest and stopping your heart can be, but it's pretty routine surgery these days, and the outcome should be good. She said, yeah, well, he has some other problems because he also had he's obese and he has diabetes and he's had cancer. And, in my book, I have a diagram that talks about chronic disease. And the main chronic diseases are just what I said: cancer, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and probably Alzheimer's. You can add that in there as a neurological condition. And those are kind of the four horsemen, of morbidity and mortality, the chronic disease. And those are all mostly related to lifestyle choices, which is lack of exercise, poor diet, and too much alcohol, whatever. Uh, but to try and figure out what was most important in causing that kind of chronic disease, there's an exhaustive study done, believe it was published in 2017 in the journal The Lancet, that looked at the global cause of these chronic diseases. So chronic disease is opposed to acute things, that happen suddenly, like infections and so on. And they determined that overall, if you looked at all of the lifestyle choices, they looked at smoking, alcohol and drug abuse. They looked at sedentary behavior and lack of exercise, which are related but different things. That nutrition was more important than any of them. In fact, it was more important than all the rest of them combined.
Wow.
So if you think about those diseases that cause the morbidity and mortality, the ones we just mentioned, cardiovascular disease, cancer, diabetes, Alzheimer's, um, are they really different diseases or are they manifestations of the same thing? And I would argue that we're coming to a new understanding. I think Peter Attia calls this medicine 3.0, that these are not, I mean, they're diseases, but just because we call them diseases, right? But they are related, and they're related to metabolic health, in poor metabolic health. And that goes right back to the cellular molecular level and really what's happening at the mitochondrial level, which are the energy converters within the cell. And so when you start investigating that, you'll see poor metabolic health. And there is something called syndrome X or metabolic disease, which is, high blood pressure, dyslipidemia, so the lipid panels are not right, obesity, and so on. It's called metabolic disorder. But these are just manifestations of that same metabolic disorder becoming the different chronic diseases that we like to name as cancer and cardiovascular disease. And but they're all related to inflammation. They're all inflammatory conditions. They're all related or exacerbated by insulin resistance, and they're all aggravated or exacerbated by obesity. And those three things all make each other worse. I think it's on page 57 or so in BioDiet. I have this little diagram, that triangle. I call it the axis of illness, right? So insulin resistance, inflammation, and obesity. And I've gone all over the world. I've presented conferences all over the place. Said, you know, two things I ask people. I go, is there anything wrong with this model? If there is, tell me. Zero. Like everybody, every physician will go, yeah. If we get inflammation down, obesity down, insulin resistance down, we could prevent a whole lot of chronic disease from happening or from getting worse. For starters. And the other thing I always ask them is, what is it about a saturated fat that's so? And no, nobody's ever been able to tell me what it is about a saturated fat that causes a problem, with the exception of palmitic acid. But it's not the palmitic acid in your diet; it's what you produce due to poor metabolic health that causes those problems. So, getting back to the root cause of all this, if we look at diet and poor diet being a causative factor in all of these chronic diseases, then does changing diet improve that? And in terms of a scientific study, there isn't enough money on the planet to do a blind controlled study because everybody's got to eat, and you'd have to follow thousands of people for tens or 20, 30 years, tens of years, and then look at the rates of healthy. And there's just, it's so expensive. I mean, our studies at the Ohio State University with about 20 people in the experimental side, it's like $1 million to do those studies for 20 people over 12 weeks. But what you can do, what we try to do at the BC Cancer Agency, and I'm not there anymore, by the way. I was a visiting scientist there, so the bio you're reading is a little bit dated. But I should mention my colleague there, Dr. Jerry Crystal, won a very prestigious award called the Rogers Award, which, in Canada is probably second in value only to a Nobel Prize. Like it's a very significant for his life's work on low carbohydrate diets and cancer. Um, so any of those people out there that are listening or watching that think, oh, keto diets are a fad, I can tell you they're not a fad. There's 20 years of hard science behind them. We do very sophisticated studies, more so than the other nutritional studies you see, which are these sort of retrospective survey, meta-analyses thing. This is real hardcore cellular molecular science. And a little shout out to my colleague, big shout out to my colleague, Dr. Jeff Volek at The Ohio State University. And he and Tim Noakes and newly minted Dr. Alex Buga have just published a paper looking at carbohydrate use in athletes and so on. That old carbo loading thing is all gone by the wayside. Anyway, to summarize, if you reduce carbohydrate in your diet, if you take the carbohydrate out of your diet, now this isn't for everybody, but for about 7 out of 8 people, you will greatly reduce the impact it has on your metabolic health. And from that, we can show that it should then be a preventative measure from getting these diseases in the first place. So I said we can't really prove the latter, and nobody ever will. So, although I would argue, back in the hunter-gatherer days, we weren't eating pizza and cornflakes and stuff like that. We were eating mostly meat. And are you carnivore? You were
I
carnivore?
am.
You are,
Yeah,
yeah.
I am.
And another of our colleagues that I've just been talking to recently that I follow, Dr. Bronson Dant. He's written a couple of books and some papers. He's sort of a citizen scientist, but a super smart guy. So I think he goes by Coach Dant too.
That's
He's
right.
a fitness instructor as well. But um, he's also a carnivore. And I should mention we have been doing, I haven't, but we've been doing studies on looking at carnivore diets and the expected increase in rates of cardiovascular, and zero. There's been zero. Nobody. They haven't had any adverse effects of people that have adopted carb. In fact, most of the effects have been very positive. So people, lose body fat, have more energy, all the blood lipids are better and so on. So I guess to get back to your original thing, all the original stuff about, saturated fats and meat and stuff being bad for your health was patently wrong. And I would like to shout out to the folks, and I should mention full disclosure that Dr. Volek that I mentioned was on the advisory panel for the new U.S. dietary guidelines that have been proposed. And they've, if you look at a ketogenic diet and that, they're pretty much the same, with a couple of exceptions. For a ketogenic diet, you'd want to reduce your carbohydrate load as much as possible. So any of that bread stuff, it's not necessary. We probably wouldn't eat that. And secondly, for some bizarre reason, they have like butter, fat, fish, beef, all that stuff. You should eat a lot of that or more of it, more protein and all that. But you're not going to be able to eat that and still come within their 10% recommendation for saturated fats. And I think this is one of the problems with decisions by committee is if you talk to any of the scientific researchers, they'll go, well, the pyramid kind of makes sense, but that's not a 10% saturated fat pyramid. So why you're still making that recommendation when there's no science behind that anyway? I don't know. But you shouldn't eat, seed oils and, monounsaturated fats are better than polyunsaturated fats because they're lower inflammatory effect. And saturated fats, as I'll say again, is the cleanest burning fuel you can put in your body. And if that becomes a big portion of your calories, your cells will actually adapt to burning that, and you won't have excessive triglycerides in your blood. I've been keto for I don't know, almost 20 years now, and even as I age, my triglycerides are super low. Like we use different units there, so it wouldn't make sense to come up with the numbers, but really low because I'm burning them all the time. My blood sugar's fine. My blood lipids are fine. I don't have, excessive fat in my blood or anything like that. I have a lot of HDL, which is pretty good if it's the right kind. But yeah, it's so I guess I'm a sample size of one, but I did also when I started this 15, 20 years ago, I was about 30 pounds heavier. And that was just fat, and that's all gone. And I still, when I weighed in today, I was 147. So I was up to almost 180, and that was all mid-abdominal fat, a little jellier and stuff like that. But never, I was always just pushing up against what would be considered overweight on that old BMI scale we don't use anymore. So I was never even overweight, but I was pushing up against it, and I certainly had a belly. But that went away within the first 12 weeks, and I could say almost 20 years later, it's still gone, as long as I stay on the diet, which I plan to do for life. So
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's absolutely amazing. And you're right about the science. We're never going to be able to do a large scale randomized control trial to prove some of this out. We've done some in the past that you wouldn't even be able to do any more ethically. But yeah, that's probably not going to be done. I do just want to point out with all the conferences you've been to, you're doing this for 20 years. We have 900 episodes of this podcast. Like I'm asking so many people for years about their stories. I'm meeting people like yourself at conferences, and like you would have expected like heart attacks. Like where are the bodies? We see the
yeah.
same people year after year at all these conferences. You mentioned Bronson. Bronson is a really great friend of mine. He's super fit in his 50s, like you said, and he's absolutely thriving on a carnivore diet. You just think that there would be so much more negative, or if anything negative were to happen, it would get so much publicity that people would be terrified of doing it. And you just don't ever see it. It's just like a logical thing.
Yeah. Now Bronson is kind of a freak of nature.
Yes.
But he does that jump up thing, where you stack things up. And as you said, he's in his 50s. And you can just go on his YouTube thing or whatever, watch that. I'm going, dude, like there are NFL players that can't do that. Like halfbacks that can't do it. He's doing it.
Yeah.
So he is but again, yeah, there where are the bodies? And when we haven't had any adverse effects in our studies. However, some people do, when they adopt ketogenic diet, get extremely high triglycerides. It's a very small percentage of people. We don't really understand why, but obviously the diet isn't suitable for those people. And as I say this, I should also frame for your audience that I'm not a physician. The doctor is an academic title,
Right.
Ph.D. I'm not a physician. And you should always follow your physician's advice, but also keep in mind that your physician has no training in nutrition, which, as I just mentioned, is probably the most important lifestyle choice you make. So you kind of have to learn it yourself, and that's why. And I want to also mention, I don't know if you can see, it's kind of small in the print there, but below my name is my wife's name, Dale Drury, and she is the one that made this book consumable by the general public. Thank you for the flattering commentary about how approachable it is, but that was her input. She's a journalist, and she was reading the kind of draft I had. She goes, this people's eyes are going to roll back in their head reading this stuff because I can go deep down those rabbit holes into the cellular stuff, which most people don't need to know. So yeah, on that note, people often ask me where do I start? And I said, well, get sugar out of your diet. That's number one, like sucrose, sugar. It's a known hepatotoxin. It's not good for you. There are substitutes you can use if you like sweet, but sugar itself is a big problem. And a lot of foods, 90+% of processed foods have added sugar in them. And it doesn't matter, by the way, whether it's added or natural. Your cells can't tell the difference between the molecules, but sugar has a lot of sucrose in it. It's half sucrose, half uh, glucose. Unless it's that high fructose corn syrup, which they put in, Coca-Cola and other soft drinks. So those aren't good. And seed oils, as I mentioned, they're highly inflammatory. So, a lot of the fast food that's cooked, that's fried, is fried in, linseed oil, cotton oil, corn oil. Those sorts of things are not good because they're inflammatory. Monounsaturated fats like, avocado oil, olive oil, those are fine. Actually, avocado oil has a lot of saturated fat in it too, and then saturated fats are usually there's both plant and animal sources, but they're much more stable and they're stable at room temperature, and that's what's good about them. But I would suggest for butter, grass-fed's better because again it's got a more omega-3, which is anti-inflammatory. And by the way, on that note, talking about cows, because they produce the milk and cream for butter. I will be presenting at I've been invited down to it's the U.S. Meat Science Association conference in Amarillo, Texas.
Amazing.
A little south. I've never been to Amarillo, so you have to tell me a thing or two about that. But I'm looking forward to going to Texas. I'll be presenting there with Dr. Eric Westman as well. We're on the same panel together.
Amazing.
Yeah, we're talking about the science of that, and I feel bad for egg. You'll see there's an egg on the front of my book because that's kind of nature's perfect food. You get all 200 tissue types of a chicken come out of there, and there's no carbohydrates in an egg. So somehow they managed to do it without carbs. So guaranteed you don't need carbs. And so egg producers and meat producers, they've had a bad rap for like 30, 40 years. And people
Yeah.
need to realize that there are more humane ways of doing things, the restorative agricultural processes and so on. But the food itself is good for you. It's not going to cause heart attacks on its own. It's not going to raise your cholesterol on its own. And you can utilize. Yeah, I don't know if you know Nick Norowitz.
Of
Um,
course.
yeah, Nick's got his. Again, people out there, you should follow Nick. Super smart guy. Oxford Ph.D. and Harvard Medical School, and he's really into this metabolic approach to health. He did a thing where he ate an egg every hour, equivalent of an egg every hour for a month. So it's 720 eggs in a month, and actually everything improved. As opposed, you figure he would have the cardiac slammer, and have high cholesterol. No, it actually got better. So there's a lot of nonsense out there that are common myths that permeate our food systems. And so I hope to go and work with the meat sciences people to help re-educate the public into understanding that there's nothing wrong with beef. There's nothing wrong with pork or chicken. Fish is great too. But what you should be limiting are not those things. You should be limiting sugar, processed food, ultra processed food, all those anything in the middle aisles in a grocery store is probably not as good for you as the stuff around the edges, right?
Yeah, good point. Well, I think that's amazing that you're presenting at that conference, and we need to continue building bridges there, just like our mutual friend, Dr. Peter Ballerstedt, does and has done constantly for years and years, is trying to
Yeah,
build those bridges between.
Peter was the guy who invited me, so
Perfect. Perfect. He's such a good dude.
really nice
Okay,
guy.
I do. I want to take a quick aside because this is something that's come up recently. I've got a ton of questions about it. I don't know if you have. You mentioned Dr. Peter Attia earlier. I don't listen to every one of his episodes. A lot of them are not relevant to me. They're very medical heavy and a lot of treatment and medications and all that stuff. But I will say, at the time of this recording, last week he put out an episode where he hosted Lane Norton, and they were kind of doing the seed oil debate thing, and they claimed that they invited somebody who is in the seed oil is bad for you group who bailed at the last minute. So it was basically Peter trying to be the devil's advocate, saying that seed oils are bad for you, with Lane Norton kind of justifying them and saying like, no, they're not bad for you, maybe don't fry with them, but the big thing is they have lots of calories, and that's the thing you need to worry about. And they had a debate back and forth, and a normal listener would walk away from that conversation thinking like, oh, I thought I had heard that seed oils were bad for you. This restaurant down the street is advertising advertising that they're seed oil free. I just listened to this conversation. It doesn't sound like I need to really worry about it. Is there, in your mind, any debate about the seed oil thing being highly inflammatory, like you said?
There's always debate. If there wasn't debate in science, we would move forward, right? We just accept whatever we have now and
Sure.
we'd never progress. So debate's a good thing. I think Peter Attia does great service. But he's kind of a, rock star celebrity physician, right? He charges 100,000 and up for his 75 clients he has, and he has his book out, Longevity, which is, I've listened to that and read it. It's a very good book, tons of great information. He's a great storyteller, very engaging person, very smart. But I don't agree with him on all levels. And he is a physician, so he takes a clinical approach to things. He's very data interested. But the general and when we talk about seed oils, they're not all the same. And by the way, most fats you eat are not just saturated fats. There's a mix of different things in them. There's always a mix. The problem with most seed oils is they have a high proportion of omega-6 fatty acids, which are pro-inflammatory and probably contribute to a lot of the endothelial damage that causes cardiovascular disease, along with something called AGEs, which we can talk about too. Saturated fats don't have that problem. And as I said, you can even increase the amount of omega-3, which is anti-inflammatory, also in Dr. Crystal's lab, anti-cancer compound. And I take at least a gram of omega-3, plus I eat a lot of fish and stuff and other things that have omega-3 in them, nuts and things. So omega-3 is a good thing, and that's in saturated fats, not so much in seed oils. So on that basis alone, and I think the important thing you said was don't heat them. And the place where people get most of their seed oil fats, polyunsaturated fats, or PUFA, polyunsaturated fatty acids, is from processed foods and fast foods and so on, which are because they're cheaper, those seed oils. And by the way, if, again, for your listeners, if you're out there, Google a seed oil refinery and
Oh, so good.
and they look like oil refineries because that's what they are. I mean, a cow, you get the teats and you squirt out some milk and there's your fat. But you have to go through this whole refining process, which heats and breaks down, and they have to distill it, sort of. Well, it's not distilling, but they have to extract, the seed oils and purify them, and it goes through all kinds of chemical and temperature changes, which really damage and because they're unstable molecules, right? The saturated fats are stable, unsaturated fats, polyunsaturated fatty acids are not as stable, and it's that instability and the number of carbon bonds which actually have the effect at the cellular level, which cause that inflammation. So, the other places, frankly, where I disagree with Dr. Attia, he's an enemy of LDL cholesterol. He thinks you should lower it to close to zero, baby levels. I don't see that in the studies I look at. There's one study, and we'll get into statins a little bit, which is the major treatment, for high LDL cholesterol. Um, if you look at the study, the Jupiter study, it was called, which is the sort of conclusive study that said everybody should be on statins because it lowered your LDL. Well, it does reduce the incidence of cardiovascular events, but only about as much as its anti-inflammatory effect. And people forget about that or miss it, is statins have an anti-inflammatory effect as well as they interrupt the production of LDL. And the anti-inflammatory effect, which is about the same as a baby aspirin, it would account for all of the decrease in cardiovascular accidents. So, and more and more studies, there's another study just came out last week, more and more studies are showing that as people get older, especially as women get older, their mortality actually goes up with their LDL. So the higher the LDL, the longer they live. And put that, I wish Dr. T was with us, I would ask him, well, why is it that half of the people that have cardiovascular accidents have absolutely normal LDL if it's such a causative agent? And I think the problem is it's not a causative agent. It's an indicative agent that there's a problem, maybe, but it's not a causative agent. The cause of cardiovascular disease is inflammation at the endothelial level, which is the lining of the blood vessels that gets inflamed and irritated, and that attracts various cell types and platelets, and you get these foam cells and you get these plaques forming and so on, which restrict the flexibility of the vessels and also can occlude them and cause, infarctions or heart attacks or strokes. Um, but that's due to an inflammatory process. So the last thing you want to be doing is, if that's going to happen as you age, is having more inflammatory chemicals in your body that you would get from omega-6, which come primarily from seed oils. So there's my answer to Dr. Atia. Oh, by the way, when he discovered at a young age, this is his own story, like in his 30s, that he was pre-diabetic and he was overweight and he's having this, he went on a ketogenic diet and that kind of cleared
That's
everything
right.
up. He's not still on a ketogenic diet. He says he doesn't believe in them for various reasons, but that's his own business. Meanwhile, people like Dr. Volek continue to do excellent research to demonstrate time and time again that every time we look at this, it's a very positive, if done right. So that's another thing is, people, what about dirty keto? What about keto and intermittent fasting? It's what's in BioDiet is what we call a well-formulated ketogenic diet. Again, that was Dr. Steve Phinney that came up with that, which means it has all the nutrients you need. It's not lacking in any nutrients at all. But it'll provide you with a diet that's low enough in carbohydrates to maintain that level of ketosis, to produce that beta hydroxybutyrate that has all the beneficial effects. If you can maintain a well-formulated ketogenic diet, I think it's, for 7 out of 8 people, it's probably the most natural and healthiest thing you can do.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for that response. I'm always up for a good debate as well, and listened in. I didn't think their arguments were very justified, and they even talk about the process of how seed oils were made. And again, Lane taking the side of like they're not that bad for you, saying that process is really not as bad as people say. Whatever. I don't know about that. I don't work in an oil factory, but I will tag our very most tagged video ever in the show notes, which is canola oil from how it's made. And anybody can go and click on the link and just watch it, and you can decide whether you want to put it in your body or not. Because like you're describing, is absolutely disgusting. I'll
Well,
leave it at that.
if you want to talk about ultra processed food, you don't get much more ultra processed than that. So
Sludge. Yeah, it's
yeah.
absolutely disgusting. I hope this isn't too big of a question to ask you, but you mentioned the axis of illness
Yeah.
earlier, and the three that you talk about. It's one of those concepts that, like, I remember exactly where I was when I was reading your book for the
Oh,
first time,
great.
and I saw that diagram. It's just something that really, really stuck with me. And I'm wondering if you could, as brief as you want, talk about each one of the three on the axis and how a ketogenic diet will positively impact each one of those separately.
Right. So, and I like that you're doing the little triangle there. So, and it doesn't matter what's what, because you can put any of them at any point. But I have, I think in the book, I have insulin resistance at the top. We can talk about what that is a little bit if you need to. Inflammation on one side, and this is chronic inflammation, not the kind of, acute inflammation you get with an infection or a wound or something. This is chronic inflammation on a systemic level. And the other one is obesity, which has been identified as its own disease. And the thing about those, and I want to do a new diagram with all the literature that supports it, but you can make arrows going both ways between all of them because they all make each other worse. So you probably at some point talked about positive feedback loops in biology. You know how when something starts, it makes something else worse that goes back and makes that initial thing worse. And so that's the way I view chronic consumption of high glycemic index carbohydrates, which is the standard American diet till recent recommendations, is that it does tend to make you insulin resistant. Why? Well, insulin's released in response to high levels of sugar in the body, and carbohydrates in all their forms are just complexes of sugars. So when they get broken down, it raises your blood sugar. So you release more insulin than you normally would. We call that hyperinsulinemia, too much insulin in the blood. When you do that over time, eventually the cells that are receiving that insulin signal to draw the sugar out of the blood, they become kind of deaf to that signal. So you need to make the signal even louder by creating more insulin, and that makes them more deaf over time. So there's that positive feedback there. So if you just did it once in a while, a high glycemic index meal, it wouldn't be, but we do that 3 times a day. And I don't mean you and me, I mean most people in the West are eating, they get up for breakfast and they have, orange juice, which is Coca-Cola with orange flavoring, super high sugar, sweetened yogurt. They have some kind of cereal, which is just carbohydrates and maybe, so it's super loading your body with carbohydrates. So it goes up. And then you get hungry at 10 o'clock because the insulin at that level is going to suck all the glucose out of your blood. Well, not all of it, but you get that triggers a hunger signal. And then what do you want? You want like a a bun or a scone or, a muffin or something like that, which is more carbohydrate. And then lunch, you're having, I don't know, noodles, sandwich, whatever. And then dinner, you got your potatoes, rice, pasta. And so you're just like boom, boom, boom. You're really harassing the metabolism in your cells constantly. And over decades, it just wears out. It just goes, okay, we can't do this any longer. We can't produce enough insulin to have enough of an effect at a cellular level to get all that sugar out of your blood. So what do you see? Your blood sugar starts rising. And when it gets to, a fasting level of 6, suddenly you're diabetic, right? We do have this sort of pre-diabetic phase now, but you're not suddenly diabetic. You've been developing that diabetes over a decade or more. Dr. Jim Johnson at UBC has done a lot of work to show that pre-signaling of insulin resistance. And then so what happens is your blood sugar level rises. And on top of that, the inflammation part of it, when you have sugar in your blood, that promotes the production of something called advanced glycated entities or end products. And those are inflammatory chemicals that circulate due to excessive sugar in the blood, and they cause inflammation. The sucrose itself causes inflammation when it's metabolized. It's highly inflammatory. Those seed oils are highly inflammatory. So we talked about that. And then, of course, when you have too much sugar in your blood, it has to go somewhere because it would be toxic if it didn't. So the only response of your body is said, well, the only place we can store this stuff in large amounts is fat. So then it takes that excess sugar and it starts making fat. And so then you get obese. So they're all related and they're all related to poor metabolic health. They all make each other worse. But the good news, Casey, the really good news is you can reverse all of that, and you can and fast. Like within a couple of weeks, you can see real improvements. And over like 12 weeks, couple of months, you can lose 20, 25 pounds of body fat is not unusual for men, maybe 10, 15 pounds for women, but it goes away fast. You just got to get that high glycemic index carbohydrate or any carbohydrate out of your diet, and your body will start to repair itself. It'll go, thank God, relief from all this carbo load, relief from all this inflammation that's associated, and the obesity goes down. So, when you're obese, you can just turn sideways in the mirror, after a shower, and you can see that. Inflammation, you have because you hurt. So you look at people that are my age or getting older, and they're in pain a lot. And you look at them. I look at people that have the men that have the beer belly, and I go, you're inflamed, dude. Like because half of the cells in there are macrophages that are pro-inflammatory macrophages. Not half of the mass, but half of the cells. So that's a big ball of inflammation sitting on your belly. And that'll cause damage to the cells because it's chronic and it will continue to do so and make things worse. And then the only way you really notice insulin resistance, unless you did, a test like a HOMA IR test to see what your insulin levels are over time, IR for insulin resistance, you probably notice it in your head, like a brain fog. And especially women, teens, as they become sort of menopausal, postmenopausal, that have this kind of brain fog, when we put them on ketogenic diets, they'll come in and go, oh my God, it's like you pulled cotton wool out of my brain, right? Like I can think clearly for the first time in years. And you go, yeah, because you're developing an insulin resistant brain, and an insulin resistant brain is a precursor to Alzheimer's, which is an inflammatory disease of insulin resistance in the brain, which some people call type 3 diabetes.
Yeah. Wow. Well, that's very well explained. I really appreciate that explanation. The last thing I wanted to ask you about today is, you say a ketogenic diet addresses all of those things. They all get better. We're talking about diabetes. Okay, that makes a lot of sense because that's related to too much sugar. You mentioned cognitive diseases. Okay, we're coming around. We're calling it type 3 diabetes. Heart disease, still a little weird that we're eating cholesterol and, that's going to be better for the heart, not worse, but we'll get on board with that. The one that I find that a lot of people have a tough time wrapping their mind around is cancer. And
Yeah.
you and I share something in common where we both lost parents way too young from cancer. And my dad and I do lunch every month, and we were just musing about it the other day, talking about, why was it that mom died of cancer and my dad didn't die of cancer? They were eating the same things, and the same things, back at the time my mom was diagnosed, was the responsible diet to be eating, a low fat, high carbohydrate diet. And, we're going back and forth, and he's asking like, wow, it's still just so hard to understand how the food that you eat has anything to do with cancer itself. How would you respond to that?
Um, Well, our research shows otherwise. Now, it depends whether we're talking about a causative agent or an aggravating agent.
I
So,
think either one.
yeah. So, when we talk about a poor diet causing metabolic disease, all of that makes it tougher for your body to fight off cancers. So there's two things I want to ask you about. I'm going to ask you this question, then I want to talk about calories before we go too, because that's another thing that I wrote an article on recently. But
That's right.
um, yeah, so during your lifetime, you said you had, I guess your mom had cancer, so did mine. Someone once said if you live long enough, everybody gets cancer. So how many times in your life do you think you potentially would get cancer if you lived long enough? Let's say you lived to 100.
Yes, that's a great question. I mean, I don't think a lot of people think about it in those terms. They just think like, how many diagnoses are you getting? How many
Right.
times is a doctor telling me I'm getting cancer?
Right. That's the best answer I've actually ever heard. But because most people go, I don't know, my mom had whatever breast cancer, my grandmother had colon cancer. They'll say, I don't know, maybe once or twice in your life, something like that. So the real answer is probably two or three times a day, every day. So you're producing cancer cells all the time. And so the production of cancer cells is a natural part of the imperfect organisms that we are. And at some point, there's some genetic disruption that causes it. And it's Thomas Seyfried at Boston College. I think he's looked into whether is it at in the cytoplasm or is it in the nucleus. But there are for sure genetic predispositions to certain types of cancer, and we can develop treatments based on that. Um, but you get cancers all the time. It's your immune system's ability to find and destroy those cancer cells because before they become problematic. And that's a natural process. We actually have cells called natural killer cells whose job it is to find those cancer cells. And there's other ones called cytotoxic T cells that come from a later response. But initially, these natural killer cells find cancer cells and kill them before they become a problem. So maintaining that healthy metabolic state maintains a healthy immune state, which is important because ultimately cancer is about an arms race between your immune system's ability to destroy it and the cancer's ability to outgrow that, and sort of a balancing thing. So if you look at that as we get older, our immune system becomes less vigilant because everything kind of slows. And so the ability of cancers to grow kind of increases on that side. So that's why you get more cancers as you get older. And by the way, cancers are about 200 odd plus different types, and they're not all the same thing. There's solid tumors, and so on. But we'll talk about it as one thing for now. Abnormal growth of cells, which could metastasize and cause death. So if we can find a way to lower the rate of growth of the cancer cells while increasing the vigilance of the immune system, we can tip it back in our favor. So what we talked about insulin already. One of the biggest growth factors that you produce is insulin. It's a protein stimulating, like so anabolic hormone that promotes growth. And cancer cells, it turns out, not all of them, but 60 to 90% of the solid tumors at least, their metabolism has changed, so they can't really burn fats. They're wholly dependent on sugar. So if you're eating this high carbohydrate diet, you're providing all the sugar they need to grow, and you're also raising your insulin levels, which is like fertilizer that helps it grow. So you're now tipping things in favor of my camera zooming in, tipping things in favor of the cancer cell growth. And so it outweighs the immune system's ability to destroy them when they're early and they start to grow. Then we have to treat them with, radiation therapy, surgery, chemotherapy, whatever. Now immunotherapies. But if we can slow that rate of growth if we lower the sugar level in the blood by taking carbohydrate out of it, doesn't lower it to zero, but it lowers it to a normal level. That moderates the insulin levels. So you have less food and less fertilizer for those tumors to grow. And the other thing we showed there's things called cytokines and chemokines and interleukins and the like interferon. Our studies at the Cancer Agency showed that people on ketogenic diets they actually improve their immune response. So it's kind of like it amps up your immune response. So at the same time you're lowering the ability of the cancer cells to grow, you're raising the ability of your immune system to prevent it. So that's in very simple terms, I mean, we could go into NLRP3 inflammasomes and HDAC inhibitors and all that sort of thing. So I could go way into the cellular molecular level, but on the metabolic level, that's kind of how ketogenic diets work to help prevent, and as we've shown in our studies, help treat cancers. It's not a cure. It's an adjunct therapy if you've been diagnosed to whatever your physician has prescribed, and always take your physician's advice. But if you do have cancer and you are considering a ketogenic diet, make sure you tell your oncologist because there are some things they need to consider, and there are some contraindications as well for that. But I hope that answers your question about that, so we can talk a little bit about calories too.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's do that. Yeah, let's talk about calories. Or you want to start with that?
Well, just because I love this one, and again, I've done this at conferences all over the place, and I might be putting you on the spot here a bit, Casey, but I just want to ask you what a calorie is.
A calorie is a measurement of essentially heat, correct? Where you're heating up a certain amount of water, 1 degree.
Yeah,
I don't know exact the formula, but something along those lines.
1 mil or 1 cc of water by 1 degree. That's what a calorie is. So it's a unit of heat energy, right? Or a unit of energy. And how much does it weigh?
Exactly.
Doesn't weigh anything.
It doesn't weigh anything. It's not what it's measuring.
So why, when we look at weight management, are we always talking about calories?
Great question. We're both drinking water right now. The water's getting inside our bodies. That's
Yep,
probably making us weigh more, but there's no calories in this.
until you pee it out or sweat it out or breathe it out or whatever. Right. So here's the thing, and it doesn't matter whether like you're lean, I'm pretty lean. You're very lean, by the way. I've seen some of your pictures hiking with your wife and stuff. So there's
She
another
drags me around.
testament to the carnivore diet, and Sean Baker and so on, and anyway, so every gram that I have when I get on the scale in the morning, is something that went in my mouth, right? You don't just absorb mass from the planet, you eat it. But it's not the calories that you eat that adds to your mass. It's the mass of the food that you're eating, right? Okay, everybody I think can agree with that. We can also probably agree that the average person that's the average size, like you or me, needs about 2,000 calories a day of energy in order to maintain the systems we call metabolism, anabolic and catabolic reactions, right? So you do need to get 2,000 calories from somewhere. And you don't absorb that from the sun either. That comes from the food you eat. But the weight is due to the mass of the food. The energy supply is associated with that mass because it comes in the food that you eat. So here's the math question, I might be putting you on the spot. If you wanted to get those 2,000 calories, but eat the least amount of mass, would you want to eat really dense calorie foods or really low dense calorie foods?
You'd want to eat the more dense calorie foods.
Right, because then you're eating less mass to get those calories. And it turns out that fats are about 9 grams per kilocal, there's a food calorie, and carbohydrates and proteins are 4. So, in fact, if you want to manage your weight, if you want to consume the least amount of mass, but still get those calories, you actually want to eat more fat, not less fat. So we have this notion that eating fat makes people fat. No, eating fat actually helps you get skinny because the fat itself is not the building block stuff, the proteins and so on that makes up your cells. It's just used as fuel and a little bit as insulation and so on, right? But it's and making hormones, but it's really just for fuel. So if you just want to get that fuel, if you want to get those 2,000 calories in olive oil, it would be about 2/3 of a cup. And you could just slug that back, and that's all the energy you'd need for a day. And you wouldn't put any mass on your body other than that 2/3 of a cup, which weighs, I don't know, a few ounces. But you get all the energy you needed. So I just, when people talk about calories in, calories out, I'm gonna do, and there's that really naive notion that, well, I can eat whatever I want because I exercise all the time. I'm a triathlete, so I eat whatever I want. And you go, that's a good ticket to chronic disease. I've never heard one because
Good point.
if you're exercising a lot, you're putting a lot of strain on your body for something. You need a really healthy diet. And if you're just eating crap because you think you can outrun your fork, well, you got a comeuppance happening. And that actually, Tim Noakes, who I know one of the leaders going way back, He was a marathon runner and ended
That's
up
right.
with diabetes at a young age because he basically burned his pancreas out carbo loading, right, in those old days. And I teach nutrition class. I had a student ask me early on in the nutrition class this year, second year course, like I don't understand what you're saying because athletes need a lot of carbohydrates. Like I don't know how you expect us to perform if we're not. And I was sort of well, you're only 20 years behind the times, but I get that because that's what we've been telling you, and that's what your parents believe and your coach probably believes. But it's starting to come around, and I have to say, all politics aside, and we won't, no ad hominem attacks on who's involved, but the new U.S. dietary guidelines are a huge step forward, a huge step forward. So, and as I say, I know Ben Bickman a little bit. I know Jeff Volek well. They're superstar researchers that are doing the cellular molecular stuff on low carb diets. So they've had an influence. And finally, I mean, I call him Jeff because he's my friend, poor Dr. Volek has been up on Capitol Hill a number of times, trying to convince them of the science and how crazy the old nutritional guidelines were. And they're making people sick and obese. And right now in the United States, it's above 78% now of people are overweight or obese. So when I was
Terrible.
born in the 60s, the average weight of an American male was around 158 to 162 pounds. Now it's almost 200 pounds, right? And you're not getting a lot taller. So it's all weight. And that's about the same time we started recommending this high carb diet, which causes that insulin resistance, inflammation, and eventually obesity, right? And it makes itself
Yeah.
worse. So,
Wow.
so yeah, anyway,
That
so I
was
want to get that calorie thing in because I would love people to just stop talking about calories in food. And if they do, say, oh, that's high calorie. Well, I should eat that because then I'm getting less mass for my calories.
that's just about the best explanation on calories I've ever heard. So thank you for that. I'm glad we went there. I love my chats with you. I love getting to hang out with you. You're a very kind person. You're an amazing educator. And the cool thing is, I know we could go so deep into any of these things, and you'd be able to explain mechanisms and all kinds of stuff. But for now, Dr. Harper, again, thank you so very much for all of your amazing work. Where can people go to find you and connect with you and your work, and where can they go to find BioDiet the book?
Well, biodiet.org is our website. I mean, the book's been out for a long time now, so I mean, you can still get it. There's certainly get it on audio or we have an audio version. My wife and I read it ourselves, and there's also the ebook. I'm not printing any more copies anymore, but there's still some around, so you could probably get those. And you can just go on to Amazon or whatever. They have them all on there, all the booksellers. But you won't find it in like Barnes and Noble on the corner or whatever. It's
Got
been
it.
out for 6 years now, so that's good. But I was going to suggest the Meat Science conference that I'm going to is I think the 21st to the 24th in Amarillo, Texas. It's possible that some of your listeners might be there, so please have them look me up and find me and
In
say
which
hello.
month? What was the date again?
It's June 21st to 24th, I believe, in Amarillo. And I don't know Amarillo, so if there's any locals there that are listening that would like to connect and we can go and have a glass of dry wine or something like that, that would be great. And then maybe, it'll be about your 1,000th show after that, and maybe we can connect again and do that. I'd love to be on the show again. I love talking to you all the time. I hope maybe you can make it down to Amarillo, but if not, we'll run into
I
each
would
other
love
at
to.
some point. Yeah.
Yeah, I would love to. That's amazing. We'll link
Well,
all of that up
Peter
in the
will
show
be
notes.
there too, so you can connect with Peter. So because he
Okay, yeah,
invited me.
perfect.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, he's
Cool.
awesome. Great. We'll link all of that up. And yes, hopefully it's not too long before I see you again and get to learn from you again. And our audience is certainly very appreciative, as am I. So,
Yeah.
David Harper, thank you so very much for everything you do. And thank you for taking time to be on our show today. We really appreciate you.
Go Seahawks.
There you go. Go Seahawks. This has been another episode of Boundless Body Radio.